Pythagoras, the name associated with the theorem to discover the hypotenuse of a triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Allegedly living from around 570 BC to 495 BC, born to his parents Nisarchus, a gem engraver, and Pythias, a descendant of the Geomares, a wealthy noble family from modern-day Syria. A story goes that when Pythias was still pregnant with Pythagoras, his parents voyaged to Delphi, Greece, to discuss with an oracle over their coming child. It's said that the oracle predicts that the child would be a great and handsome man who would benefit humanity. Born in Samos, Pythagoras' youth and young adult life was filled with teachings and travels, some saying he was taught by many pre-Socratic philosophers, such as Pythias of Syros, Alexander, and the 2 seven sages, Bias of Prine and Thales of Miletus, traveling to learn from many masters as far as Babylonia, Phoenicia, and possibly from Zoroastrian Magi. The purpose of these ventures were not only to absorb knowledge, but notably to study the religion and gain wisdom spiritually. It was these travels that led him to Egypt, in which he would study in Thebes under the local priests. It was this time in Egypt that led him to his theorem. Allegedly, it was at this time at the palace in which he was studying the stone tiles. During the study, he imagined right triangles within the tiling, and it was there that he recognized that the sides of the square on the side lengths were equal to those of the hypotenuse. Returning from his trips, Pythagoras established a house of teaching in Samos. This, however, was not the birthplace of Pythagoreanism, but a precursor, the semicircle. The core beliefs of Pythagoreanism was never practiced in the semicircle, though it is thought to be the location in which many Pythagorean ideas developed. This semicircle was a place in which attracted many of the sharpest minds of the ancient Hellenistic world. The semicircle's life, however, would be cut short, with Pythagoras, at the age of 60, relocating his teachings over to the Greek settlement of Croton. However, many of these stories and events of the life of Pythagoras were written over 600 to 800 years after his death, with 2 popular written works discussing the life being only written around the 1st and the 2nd century. According to Dr. Piers Bressel-Hall of Cambridge University, we have extremely little evidence of the life of Pythagoras. In fact, the theorem that we know Pythagoras for today was not discovered by him, and that there is some chance that he might have not even existed at all, but as someone who is in fact more of a legendary character. We do not know the date in which he lived, nor if he really came from Samos. There might have been a man around the time period, and he could have had ideas and beliefs, but overall there is no way to truly know. Modernly, we interpret him as an academic type, a mathematician, philosopher. However, this type of terminology would not be used on him, but a more fitting description would be that of a shamanic individual. We do know, though, that there was a marginalized group or community of people who held religious and spiritual standing. The canon legend of its genesis is that Pythagoras established a school of thought in Croton, which would accumulate thousands of eager followers, creating the first of the Pythagorean commune. Under Pythagoras, the community of Croton grew in wealth and prospered, becoming a driving political force in the city. In some time around 510 BC, it was the Pythagoreans who aided Croton in their war with the neighboring city of Sybaris, being the main reason for their victory. Tension grew, however, as the Pythagoreans grew more powerful. They blockaded the people of Croton to establish a democratic system of governance rather than the existing monarchical system in place. This led to an attack on the Pythagoreans, with the burning of the council house trapping the majority of them inside. According to classical Greek historian Aidan Nell, this was where the story tends to differ, with some accounts saying Pythagoras himself died alongside his followers in the council building, with another saying he escaped but died months later with a handful of his men due to malnutrition, or committing suicide after the attack while grieving the loss of many followers. One idea of his death which is quite fascinating is that of which, after the attack, Pythagoras was chased off into a field where he was cornered, met with fava beans, and it being a belief in Pythagoreanism that fava beans held the life force of the dead, and therefore was sacred. Pythagoras was unable to run through the bush, and was immediately captured and executed by his assailants. Dr. Bressel-Hall states, however, a more likely structured series of events of the early Pythagoreans, that their community never grew too large and tended to live more isolated, slightly outside cities. This group was indeed marginalized, being ostracized from many villages and locations for being religiously strange. The cult, these early Pythagoreans, would last about a century, likely being founded around 550 or 520 BC. Now, as a cult, as a community, and as an organized group where individuals would come together and practice the beliefs with one another, would dissipate at some point in the 4th century. Outside of this group, after the cult died out, the beliefs and thoughts continued to circulate discussions and conversations, however. The Pythagorean school of thought was a radical and creative offshoot of the conventional Hellenistic beliefs with some major differing doctrines. They had rituals and rules added to the Greek religion at the time, such as never wearing images of the deities, forbidding to enter a temple barefoot, or how one can't touch a white rooster. Some rules got more specific and interesting, like how a Pythagorean isn't allowed to bury their dead in wool, and the right shoe must go on first. However, differing from the Greek traditional way of thought, the followers of Pythagoras believed in reincarnation, and due to that were strict vegetarians. But in fact, the only way out of the cycle of life and rebirth was through mathematics. The most notable and significant core belief of Pythagoreanism was that they believed that the entirety of the universe was math, and was made up with numbers. It was through numbers that humanity could be able to discover the mysteries of the world. They had this idea of a singular deity, a divine creator of us all. And in the bureaucratic sense, keep in mind though, this should not be compared with the Abrahamic God, for their relationship with the one creator was much different. There would be actually lesser deities who would be the ones to actually manage the world and make the things. This is how they are still connected to the Greek pantheon and even having a favorite god of Apollo. Although the statement that Pythagoras was a myth and that the Pythagorean spiritual belief had literal belief structure in mathematics is in itself wrong. Though there is large chance that Pythagoras was a fictional character, there's nothing to be entirely sure of. After the fall of the early Pythagoreans, from their wake grew two sects from the spirituality: the Acousmacatoi, who were the ones who listened, and the Mathemachoi, those who learned. The Acousmacatoi were more conservative of the two, believing in strict religious and spiritual teachings of Pythagoras and the Acousmata of events, following the religious and spiritual teachings while closing themselves off from other innovations in the mathematical field. The Mathemachoi, however, believed in the advancement of mathematics, following Pythagoras' teachings of our reality being made up of mathematical formulas and numbers. It is because of the Mathemachoi group that Pythagoras and the early Pythagoreans are viewed as such scholarly brethren, and the resurgence of the Pythagorean movement in the 4th century, which is when people start finding quotes by figures such as Plato or Socrates about the philosopher Pythagoras. Modernly, the consensus is that we view Pythagoras as this figure of mathematics and mathematics alone, and he could have been something like that, or nothing of the sorts, and these possibilities that he was nothing more than a legendary founding figure of the early Pythagorean movement, created centuries after his supposed life. But at the end of it all, he has become a symbol of peak mathematics. Due to the movement he created during the 4th century revival led to many popular figures who would identify as Pythagorean, and be more in line with how we view and associate with the name. The early Pythagoreans inspired the later Pythagoreans, whose principles went on to innovate the philosophical math world of the ancient Greeks. Pythagoras, the founder, the legend, the philosopher, the shaman, and the cult leader. But today, he is the starting domino, symbolically or physically, to our mathematical globe.